Slavenka Drakulić. I'm very happy to meet you, even so from the distance. I'm also glad that I had the opportunity, like I told you before this interview, to reread your books. Some of your books have played an important role in my moral and intellectual formation. So I will take the opportunity to talk about them as well. The last of your book translated into Romanian is one about Dora Maar and Picasso. It is published by Pandora M, an Anansi collection. But you know, I have this habit from the college. Before a difficult exam, I choose a random book from my bookshelves and I read it, even so it's about something completely different. So this morning I did the same, and I stumbled upon Julian Benda's book, The Betrayal of Intellectuals. So look, a great starting point for our conversation. The one thing that Dora doesn't like at Picasso is his inability to engage publicly in favor or even against social or political causes. It is enough, he says, to be an artist and to let art speak about commitments or non-commitments, political or social commitments, but it is indeed enough.
Yeah, that's the question. Can it be enough? Yeah, well, first of all, let me tell you how flattered I am that I had absolutely any role, any minimum role in your development, because I think this is the aim of all writing, that you influence somebody, and it's also a responsibility of a kind. I know that several of my books have been translated in Romanian, and I've been in Romania several times, and so I have some public there, and I'm very, very happy to be talking that you have chosen me to talk to. And the topic that you start with is a rather difficult one, because we would like all to say, yes, the artist should be engaged, and the artist should be also engaged more than his art is doing that. But that's really a question. My position is such that is the book fiction or non-fiction, but we are now talking about non-fiction and about painting, going to be influential in the engaged sense? That depends upon many circumstances, mostly. What I don't like is, and I'm very careful about that in my work, because my work, as you mentioned, is both non-fiction and fiction. What I do not like to directly engage in my fiction work, in my novels, because I think that the ideology or politics of any kind, if it is too obvious in the writing, in the literature, then it makes a damage. It's not good. The book as a work, should or not influence, but I mean direct engagement through the writing, through my fiction writing, I was never doing it. And I can even tell you that I have been for many years probably one of the first feminists in Eastern Europe. I published book Mortal Sins of Feminism in 1984, which was very early. And then a set of articles, I don't know how many, which were very engaged. So as a feminist and as a journalist, I was very much engaged. I was also, I think, engaged in my non-fictional book about communism or about war. I published 3 books about communism, 3 books about the war. But that kind of engagement, I do not permit myself in the work. For example, speaking of Picasso, his painting Guernica became a symbol of peace, right? But he himself did not intend it to be any kind of engagement or any kind of symbol of anything. He painted it because Dora put the pressure on him. He was not a very political person. And what it became out of it, it's no longer his responsibility. So it is interesting question. It's a polemical question. The people have different opinions about that. But I think that in this case, when we are speaking about the Picasso, I would repeat his words that art is lying in order to show the truth. So already that is something. Already that is a kind of engagement, even though not ideological or political. It depends from person to person how this artist is going to engage in other ways than in his art. But if his art became a symbol of anything, that's really not his, so to say, responsibility or not direct responsibility. So I'm very much against this direct engagement in art.
But must an intellectual, a writer, an artist speak about an oppressive regime, for example? He has to say something.
Okay, let us first say this. Not all artists are intellectuals. Yes. That's a very, very big difference between being an artist and intellectual. And we are not, all of us are not intellectuals. Picasso was not intellectual. And Dora saw it immediately. She was an intellectual, but he was not. He was in politics, in his political approach and statements, he was an opportunist. Not he joined Communist Party right after the war, believing that the Communist Party will win the elections and the Communist Party will protect him.
That's from belief.
That's his belief. Because he was only interested in securing and make safe his art. That was the only intention of his political thinking. So it's a little bit of a paradox that his the painting, Guernica, became a political symbol, although he didn't really mean it. Are intellectuals or are artists responsible for speaking about certain issues? I think that not artists, but intellectuals should speak about every single problematic and painful issue in the society. But at the same time, I know that this tradition comes from the communism, from the time where they were expected to speak in the name of those people who could not speak, who could not express their opinion. And many writers and painters and artists in general paid price for that, being engaged, speaking up in the time where it was not possible. You know that as well as I do. Now, in the times after the collapse of communism, I think the situation had considerably changed. I think nobody really cares about any opinion of any intellectual or any writer or any artist unless you are a big star, because now instead of all of that is replaced by a star system. Now you will be heard if you are Greta Thunberg, the Swedish pro-green advocate, or you will be heard if you are somebody who has a voice. But only people who became stars have voice. It's very rarely that intellectuals become stars. And then also it is intellectuals as such in the society that is as it is now, with domination of picture, not of word. The whole paradigm has changed, you know, of culture. Culture paradigm until Gutenberg times, no, until time of old Greeks, until now, it was word. Everything was based, the culture was based on word, on writing. And now it became, the paradigm has changed into a visual one. And it is for the last 20, 30 years that visual is more and more and more dominating. Of course, because of the development of the
mass media, television, technology.
That's very clear. But nevertheless, so the word has less and less weight. And besides, in the chaos of the internet world, you cannot any longer distinguish what is important, what is valuable, what is stupid, what are lies. I mean, it's a chaos. It's very difficult to get the word out there, and then when it's out, it's no guarantees that anyone will hear or understand, because at the moment, I don't think that being intellectual and speaking as intellectual carries much weight or reaches very far.
You know, in recent years, we are talking about this cancel culture, and many people compare it with the censorship of totalitarian political regimes. Is this a valid analogy?
The what political regime?
Totalitarian political regime.
You mean the culture?
Yes. In
the internet culture?
Yes. Cancel culture. Political correctness, cancel culture.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but that the political correctness is taking more and more space and changing many things from all sides. I'm sure of that. You know, if you mean about Me Too, if you're specifically meaning towards the women. I am not so very much for the political correctness when it becomes, so to say, a means of oppression, that you are really have no way of expressing yourself freely because you have to be so very, very careful. But that exists even without Me Too, within a feminist movement. You also have to be very, very careful how to address somebody. No? But then it became, to the point, it's prevailing to the point of Americans, for example, taking the face of a black man from this box of, popcorn or beans or something, no? On the other hand, you have to be very careful how to address women. You have to be very careful how to address women within women's group. You have to be very mindful about gender, about sex. You have to be very mindful in many, many expressions. So even the literature, for example, the father of Pippi Longstrump, for the Pippi, this is the Swedish very famous book. I don't know what's the Longstock or something. What is in English the title of that book? The father was a Negro king. So they had to take out the expression Negro king. It is very confusing, but it is kind of paying back to the long time of oppression of these so-called marginal groups. The problem is that we didn't find the balance there. And I think I personally try to be very, very balanced about that and don't go very much for political correctness if I think it is overdoing it. But I'm telling you, it's a historical phenomena that actually feels to me like paying back the debt.
Just a little return to this theme of intellectuals facing the history. We have this recent case, somehow related to atrocities in the Yugoslavian wars, is the Nobel Prize awarded to Peter Handke. Is this a trivialization of evil? I don't know, do we need moral clarity maybe? Or life is something and the writings something really different? Biography and opera.
When Peter Handke visited Serbia and visited Milosevic, and when he wrote his pro-Serbian essays, and when he was kind of romanticizing Serbian side, I wrote a couple of articles against him.
That's why I am asking.
I think that we are making a mistake, the same mistake that I notice over and over when we are speaking about any artist, to make a difference between the work, the corpus of his literature, and his personality. Yes. Long ago, Hans Magnus Enzensberger, the German writer, he said during the war in the Balkans, wars, plural of course, he said, why do we think that intellectuals, writers, journalists, that they are morally of a higher order, that they have moral values, that higher moral values? Why do we think that of them? That's not the case. As a persons, they have moral values that they have. Radovan Karadzic was a poet and psychoanalyst. Edward Limonov was a poet, and he was shooting to Sarajevo from the hills up there. It is Handke, who is an excellent writer. And when I was young, he was one of my dear writers, especially the book about mother. But as a moral person, he really behaved in an unnominable way. He was really deserving all the despise and criticism that he got. Now, would I give a Nobel Prize to the person who behaved in such a way? I'm glad that I was not in that situation to choose, because as I said, as a writer, he was a wonderful writer. As an intellectual, he failed. As an engaged person, he engaged on the I would say wrong side. So his work became highly disputable. So I was very, very, very grateful. I was very happy not to be in position to judge him for any literary prize. But I understand the controversies about that. And that's the same thing with Picasso, to return to Picasso, Dora, because many people judge Picasso as a primitive macho man who behaved very badly to Dora. Yes, he did, which doesn't tell very much about his art. And so this is the dilemma. This is the problem. My general view is do not try to meet writers or any artist, because it's always, you always then notice the difference between the person and his work. And you don't want to meet the person whose books you love very much, because they might disappoint you as a person. No? So I try to stick to that, which is very hard, because of course I move in this circle, so it's very difficult. But it's really so. You really have to distinguish that. We have an excellent director from ex-Yugoslavia. His name is Emir Kusturica. He won the award when father was, I think it was, do you remember Dolly Bell, for that film in Cannes in 80s.
Yeah, I know him.
A wonderful director, was a wonderful director, but then he took this in the war, so he took the Serbian side. And now again, the same question, are we going to judge his movies, especially his early movies, from that point of view, that he was on the Serbian side, or we are going to step down? And I was very critical of his film for different reasons, but I mean, morally, he behaved in that way. So we have to still have kind of making the distinction there.
I just remember, you let's talk a little bit about an episode of your visit in Israel. You talk about this visit in one of your
I wrote a chapter. I wrote a story about
when you were obsessively asked if you feel guilty about what happened in Holocaust, about the atrocities that happened to the Jews. You said that you didn't understand from the beginning that the question was not actually about you, but about how society deals with this social. But
maybe those people who listen to us now should know that Croatia was a fascist state between 1941 and 1945. Maybe they need to know that. And that we had a concentration camp, where some 30,000 Jews perished, among other people, like communists, the enemies of what they declared the enemies of the state, Roma people, and a huge number of Serbs, mostly the Serbian minority in Croatia. Yes, I didn't understand it because I was, but I like to distinguish between collective and individual responsibility. Of course, collective could be only responsibility, individual could be guilt. For example, if I would have killed somebody or if I would have been ordering killing or something like that, this is an individual guilt. But collective responsibility is, of course, that what you mentioned, for what, how generally a society, what's the attitude towards it. But the attitude towards Holocaust in Croatia, it's absolutely, what should I say, not proper, because Croatia found itself after this emancipation, so-called, or after the war, or after liberation, whatever you call it, after establishing independence, it found itself in a position which was difficult for this reason. Franjo Tuđman, who was the first president and leader during the war, he wanted to make a connection with Croatia before the Second World War, trying somehow to play down this Holocaust moment in the Croatian history of 41-45, and making some kind of bridge to the new Croatian Republic. The problem was that it was very difficult, you know, and on the other hand, this was the only time when Croats had their own state. Unfortunately, like in Slovakia, it was a fascist state. So he tried to somehow bridge it with all kinds of tricks, but it was very difficult. In many ways, this question was neglected. It was pushed down. There were people who published books that it wasn't a concentration camp, that it was not a dead camp. And the numbers were highly disputed. And this is the polemics that is still going on the, what should I say, on some kind of backfire. Because people don't like they don't like the idea that the only state they had was a fascist state. Who would like that idea? I mean, so we still have a situation when on the day of Jasenovac, which was a concentration camp, the representative of the state go there to put flowers, but representative of Jewish people in Croatia, or Serbian people for that matter, don't go there together with the government people. So you see how sensitive this is, yeah.
You know, we have this problem with Holocaust in Romania too, with admitting that we had an anti-Semitic attitude. But you quote Shalamov in one of your books, who says, in order to exist, to survive, a human being has to forget. Maybe a society has to forget also in order to survive.
Well, we have now this situation. Imagine so many years, 25 years after the war, nothing is forgotten. Nothing is forgotten. And it's still a big problem because we had problems with dealing because of Holocaust with the Second World War history here in Croatia. And now we again have a problem admitting our own war crimes. We only want others to admit their war crimes, but not our own war crimes. And our own, I mean, you have the situation when one or two or a few of these people who were sentenced in The Hague as war criminals are still hailed here as heroes. How do victims feel about that? There are very few, because the idea of the ICTY, the tribunal in The Hague, was that the respective countries will continue when they stopped working, as they did, as they are, that they will continue to trial their own criminals themselves. Well, that I can say the best, that it's happening very, very slow. And it's not good for reconciliation, what I call.
Yeah.
So it's still very sore and very big problem. And I had the feeling that the wars, especially between Serbia and Croatia, are used as a political argument in every crisis.
Still.
Yeah, absolutely.
Still. In this context, you talk about this difference between German and Spanish method to deal with the past. We know that in Germany, after the Second War, it was a big school almost of children who were asking their father, how, why were you a Nazi?
In the war? Yeah, it's a classical question.
It's not about placing blame. It's about memory. Does post-communist countries failed to put this question?
I think they're not, and because they should actually, what the next generation should ask their parents is, were you a member of a communist party? Did you collaborate with communism? They're not asking that question. I was in all of these former communist countries, and I have noticed there lately, for example, in Ukraine, that they somehow try to, people who experience communism, they don't talk about that.
Yes.
In I don't know how many, but a huge number of communists or members of a communist party in Czechoslovakia. Today, if you ask them, were you a member of the Communist Party, they will all say no. And from today's perspective, if you would make opinion poll, it would look as if Czech Communist Party was so small. There was almost no Communist Party there. In real life, majority was a member. Why? Because of opportunistic reasons, because they need to get a job. Otherwise, you couldn't. Today in Croatia, if you are not a member of the leading party, Conservative Party, Croatian Democratic Union, you can hardly get any good job, including journalism. So that's what I call ruling in the authoritarian way. Even if you have democracy today, it's another issue, of course.
Yes,
but
yes.
I mean, I wanted to illustrate that people they behave as if they would like to forget what has been before. And the young people, they thought, I was born in 1949. So when I was 15, let's say, to me, the Second World War, and it's only 1960, or I don't know, let's say 55 or so, the Second World War that my father took part in looked to me as if it happens at the time of Greek wars or something like that, very, very far away. So for a young generation, let's say, for a generation who would be my grandchildren, 25, 25, to them it seems, something, communism, oh my God, this is something so far away. Granddad doesn't talk about that. My parents were too busy to arrange themselves in the new political circumstances to get a job, to become a member of the proper party. I've seen Romanian film Matura. What is it in Romanian? What is the Romanian title? I guess also Matura. Graduation.
Baccalaureate.
Cristian Mungiu. I think that, and I also wrote it in this new book I have in one story. I wrote that if you see Baccalaureate, or what is the film in
Baccalaureate.
Okay. It is enough if you need to see one film from Eastern Europe, from post-89 Eastern Europe, it's that, Cristian Mungiu, Baccalaureate. That's enough, because there you understand everything about that generation. Generation who were perhaps 20 when 89 happened, and then had high hopes, went abroad, came back, and experienced what they're experiencing still. You know? So it's, I don't think that we are very far from settling accounts with communism. And one of the reasons is, I think, that as of late, in the last 10 years, because many people became very disappointed. So there is a very much of nostalgia, not for political system, no,
yes,
but for the kind of life there, security, most of all, mostly for the security.
Yes. I have this sensation that when I'm talking to my mother, he wants to defend her life in communism.
But she's right. She was younger,
yes.
She had a job, she has apartment, grandma had a pension, so you had security.
And like a woman, she was powerful because, you know, in communist countries, women played a very important role in families.
Yes, of course. But somebody once told me, if some dissident, some big figure, communist dissident said, if people are choosing, if you give them to choose between freedom and security, they will always choose security, not freedom.
Dostoevsky's dilemma.
So it's security comes first.
Mm-hmm. So even now in coronavirus era, even now, security comes first.
Well, now in Corona times, I'm not so very sure, because some societies go for these police methods like France, and some other are laissez-faire, and it's a different attitude, and we don't really know what will come out of the whole Corona period, and it's better not talk about that for one reason, because it's unknown problem. You know, it was very fascinating how people quickly adjust to the new normal, but now it's showing its toll too. So I don't think we know what we are dealing with. So it's in social terms also.
We have talked about communism, but after the fall of the communism, when there was no foreign enemy, there was no more Soviet Union, how can we explain the rise of this new phenomenon, nationalism, in countries who known dictatorship before? For example, today, all these illiberal democracies, like Poland, like Budapest, like Serbia even.
Well, nationalism is not so difficult to explain, I think, at all. Because all this, if you can take Soviet Union, or you can take Yugoslavia for that matter, you can, nationalism, I think, basically comes from two sources. It shows up when there is an insecure time, where the society is not secure of its identity and its position in the world, but comes from the past, in the sense that these countries in Eastern Europe, especially in the Soviet bloc, nationalism, not the nationalism, but the notion of the nation and ethnic belonging was always suppressed. The language was always suppressed. In Soviet Union, everybody has to speak Russian. In Yugoslavia, our official language also for Kosovar Albanians, for Macedonians, for Slovenes who have different language, the official language that they had to learn in school. And they had schools in their own language, but they had also to speak so-called Serbo-Croatian or Croatian-Serbian, right? So it was the idea of nationality, national belonging, and ethnicity was suppressed by the state. And as you know, the churches were the religion was either banned or repressed. And on the other hand, people always knew what is their language, what is their belonging, and also what is their religion. Yes. So in the unsecure times, and this I have seen best in Yugoslavia, in former Yugoslavia, when the war started. The war started, of course, on, so to say, on the basis of nationalism, but nationalism had to be, you had to remind people that nationalism is bad. And the church played an enormous role there. The church why the church played such a negative role in this case, or had so much power before and had it now also in the new societies, new democratic society, church has both Orthodox and Catholic Church has, or a Muslim for that matter. Why? Because during this time, let's call it totalitarian times, the church was a keeper of the national identity. It was a keeper of the language, keeper of the national identity, keeper of certain values. And therefore it had a role, if not in the state, on the state level, but in community.
Yes.
So in the time of crisis, it's the church who comes and said, okay, I will help you. This is your identity. This is your language. And in the time of war, of course, it had an enormous influence, both Catholic and Orthodox and the Muslim faith. And in the country where very, very few people declared themselves as religious, Religion, in other words, saying Croat during the war, it meant Catholic. Saying Serb, it meant Orthodox. So this became equal. It became, so to say, your ID card, your nationality and your religion. Even if you are not religious, it became your identity. And I think this is so. Historically, you have the conscience about where do you belong, but it is not important. In my schooling, I really never knew who is a Serb, who is a Croat. No one ever paid any attention to that in my generation. And then in the 90s, suddenly everybody knew who is a Serb, who is a Croat, your neighbor, your person in the work, your schoolmate. Then it became not important, but also fatal. In order to achieve that, you have to do a lot of work. You have to do a lot of propaganda before you start the war. But this is it. Or we can take another example, and this is Basques in Spain.
Catalonia. Catalonia,
you can take that. So there are elements, outside elements, who influence rise of fear, and this rise of fear then reminded people that it is better to be part of something, to herd, to come together and close the society. And that's there we have nationalism.
Or even, I don't know, even Brexit, or even what happened in American society, this strong polarization
now with COVID vaccine is the same thing. It's then in Europe. How do you, it's still national politics. There is no European policy of vaccination or taking care of sick or nothing. European Union collapsed completely on the issue of COVID. But you mentioned also American society. Yes, there we have to take into account another division, class division between rich and poor, but also color division. So it's
but old school divisions.
Yeah, but it's very easy to divide society if you want to. If somebody wants to start the war today, I can tell them exactly how to start it. It's not so very difficult. Sorry to say.
We talk about Eastern European countries, but the Iron Curtain fell. But soon after it, it became clear that things will not go the way that people from these countries hoped they will. They were not treated, East Europeans, like younger brothers of the Western Europeans, people that have suffered, and they are now, I don't know, entitled to being rehabilitated or to do not answer to Western letters. It's one of your examples. Are these kinds of expectations transformed into resentments today?
Yeah, partly yes. And but on the other hand, I think we had very high expectations.
Yeah.
I always think that we saw Europe as an old rich aunt. So we visit aunt, we get a lot of nice presents. Well, no, we did not get anything, but it was not idea that we would get anything, you know. What we got a big change in a political system. The change in political system made the possible changes in economic system. And this economic system is called capitalism. I do not think that the people, when they were voting for new democratic government, that they were really conscious that they are voting also for economic system capitalism, which is characterized by the very difficult behavior or values of than a planned economy. Yes. So, and somehow I think they expected to have, I don't know, the next day they would wake up in a bigger, better apartments, having a wonderful car waiting for you outside, even a wife maybe more beautiful than she was before. So this material of our dreams collapsed very, very quickly. And what happened instead was privatization, which was, I think, highly problematic in every single country, because of course, people who were closest to the communist power, they enriched themselves. And then the difference between rich and very few rich and the poor became huge. Unemployment, economic crisis, I mean, it all was there in no time. And I think people psychologically were totally unprepared for that. No wonder that they started to, after a while, to feel resentment, as if somebody owned something to them and they and didn't fulfill it. But it wasn't the idea. They didn't get it right. They had to fight for on another terms now, you know. And I think that the Western countries didn't understand that quite, you know. In year, I don't know, perhaps 10 years ago or so, there was a big opinion poll in Germany where they asked about nostalgia for the previous season. And of course, you could expect that there were more nostalgic between East Germans, Osseties, no? But what was not expected and what was very interesting for me too, was that many young people who were born after or were too small to remember East Germany were also nostalgic. Yes. So how could they be nostalgic? Why? Because, of course, of the, I would say, memories and talks around the table in the house, in the kitchen, from their parents. Otherwise, it wouldn't be possible. So again, it's not the nostalgia for the political system, but for different kind of life that they had there. No, nobody owns us anything. Yes, the older generation are losers in that new political and economic systems. Younger people will make it, of course. Many of these young people, and this is one of the big topics, one of big issues, not topics. It's not a topic, but it's issue that many young people leave Eastern European countries, and they are migrating within European Union and looking for a job. And it's already, I think, 4 or 5% of a general population of European Union are these migrating young people from other countries.
So would you say European Union doesn't work, or, I don't know, reached its limits?
No, we are talking about another issue now. We are talking about young people who are leaving their countries and in that way making them even more poor. For example, Romania had 20,000 doctors who had left and practically it's really, and nurses, and it's a big problem. Educated young, for the first time we have in Eastern Europe, we have brain drain. And this is, and that's very dangerous. Now, speaking of European Union, we don't know. We only know that it had demonstrated very bad, stupid and unorganized behavior around COVID and this pandemic crisis from the very beginning, from Bergamo until today. But on the other hand, we have to say that European Union is huge bureaucratic mastodont. It's a huge apparatus, and it's very difficult to move it. And of course, when you mention earlier Hungary, Orban knew it, and he was playing it. And he's being punished only after 10 years of behavior like autocratic
He is not entirely punished. Yes.
Yeah.
He's tolerated.
No. A little bit of no.
Yes.
Yeah. So
and he can say loudly that he represents the true Europe.
He can say whatever he wants. And he's doing that, but it's not so much important what he's talking outside of the country, but what he's telling to his own people. I mean, I find it very autocratic, the way he behaves, but it is the tradition in former communist countries. So this is what I'm saying. You have a regime, you have change of the regime, you had communism, now you have democracy, but the leadership almost in all of these countries is behaving in this autocratic way. If they have a slightest chance, they behave like it. And this will also take generations to change.
Yeah. I would like to end our trip where we started by returning a little bit to Dora and Picasso. It seems to me that what struck you the most about Dora is the way she renounced to her own artistic life and career.
Yes.
Was it something maybe related to her identity? Neither Croatian nor French. She's weak a little bit.
She is. These are several witnessing accounts that I read in various biographies. Mm-hmm. That she was weak, that she was insecure about her identity.
Yes.
And she finally found herself in this, in photography from a very small age. When you see her photographs, when she got her camera from her father as a present when she was 13, 14, those photos are fantastic. And if you put up her exhibition recently, it was put up somewhere, I'm not sure, in London perhaps, they are so modern, they're so good, both those that as reportages that she published as reportages, and also that were called not-realistic artwork of hers. She already had several exhibitions before she met Picasso. Now, renouncing herself, the aim of that book was not so much, as all three books that I wrote, of three very creative women, Frida Kahlo, her, and Dora and Mileva Einstein, was to actually take a deeper insight into relationship between two creative people. Mm-hmm. Frida Kahlo was married to Diego Rivera, and in the time when the novel is happening at beginning in the first half of the 20th century, Diego Rivera was one of the biggest muralist, painter, communist, very well famous name from Mexico. Frida Kahlo was a small girl, nobody knew about her. Her painting, she started to paint very young, and he supported her in her painting. But the attitude was, oh, this little girl can paint very nice, interesting, yes, very good. I mean, nobody ever even thought that she would become an icon, because her painting is fantastic. And then Dora, it is the balance between, it's balance of power, I would say. He supported her, and Dora came out as a winner in historical terms also, but she never gave up on herself. She had a hard life, she was very sick, she was painting in the bed, but she's a winner. Dora is a loser, but this is a set of circumstances together with her, as you mentioned, kind of a weak character, insecurity. But in order to somehow establish, I would say, a right picture of Dora and her circumstances, she fell in love with Picasso, but Picasso was also her and everybody else's at that time maestro. He was the top artist and the top teacher. So if he would say something, if he would come and say, this is not black, this is white, Well, many people would say, perhaps we should look in a different way, you know. He was immensely influential. He was dominating.
And confiscating the others.
Yes. And in this relationship, she had no much chance. What she wanted is partnership. Yes. Not only, you know, a woman romanticizing, not only love, but also partnership. Why would Picasso need partnership? He didn't need anybody. What she understood much later, is cannibalizing everybody around him, using people, using everything as material for his work. And the only thing he ever cared in his life was his work, was his art. He didn't care about people at all. At the end, she understood that. And she said, and these are her words, not my words put in her mouth, but her words. There is no Pablo, there is only Picasso. So there is only artist, not a private person. So I was interested in this relationship because obviously he was so dominated that she couldn't but renounce photography and start painting. Of course, her painting was not her vocation at all. So she wasn't a bad painter, she could paint, but this was completely irrelevant in her opus, you know. So I think it's a combination of facts, but you could see how difficult it was to her when he left her.
Yes,
because she experienced a terrible collapse, crisis, psychological crisis. She went to. She was hospitalized, and she also had electric shocks given, and then a long period of psychotherapy. So it's always a combination, but you actually want to see it from close by.
It's a book written from Dora's point of view, let's say.
Yes, exactly.
My favorite book, one of your books, which is that is very important for me, it's They Could Never Hurt a Fly. It's a book written from the perspective of the murderer, of the aggressor, did you manage to understand to its final extent the mechanism that makes an ordinary man become a war criminal? It is this question, this Vasily Grossman's paradox, how a ruthless torturer is at night a loving father, reading bedtime stories to his children. You know, he's a very good killer and an equally a very good father. How these two can meet?
There are many books on that subject. And after writing a book about beginning of the war in Croatia, this is Balkan Express, among ordinary people, how that happens, and that's writing a book as if I'm not there, about mass rapes from the perspective of the victims. Of course, you come to the question when you ask yourself, okay, but I would like to know, who are these perpetrators? Who are these people? So I then started to look into these perpetrators from nearby, and to me it was very important to choose people from different walks of life, not only Mladic and Karadzic and Biljana Plavčić and such people, but also ordinary.
A boy from a village.
Yeah. So, while writing this and studying, of course, this you make documentation in the court, okay, being there, watching them, and all other material that I did. And also just to mention this book, because it made absolutely the most important influence on me, and this is Christopher Browning, Ordinary People and War, and this is Brigade 101. This is the people who volunteered for the war in Germany at the beginning of the war, so they could have said no, but they didn't. Even when they started to kill in Poland, they were first who executed by hand, so to say, thousands and thousands of people. They still could say no, but they didn't. And then he is giving you an insight in the human, what I call human condition or human character. I think after studying all of that, and I'm not the first one to think about, you can think about Philip Zimbardo, who did the Stanford experiment. It's still very relevant for behavior of people in such conditions. I think that what is the most important are the circumstances, because I think we as human beings have both possibilities. We carry
good
in
and
us,
evil from nature.
Yeah, good. Well, from whatever we have from nature, human nature is that you have both ability to do good and bad. And I think the first organized system that recognizes that in every society and every civilization is religion. And I think we take the words from religion, good and bad, good and evil, right? So we have this possibility, and I think it depends to the great extent upon circumstances. I have seen after that book, I had many reactions, of course, very close people who said, no, I know that I would never be able to commit an evil or a bad thing. You know? Yeah. I have to say that for myself, I'm not sure about that. Absolutely not sure, because I know what kind of role circumstances could play. And this is exactly what I wanted to show in the book. What kind of role circumstances play in human life. And of course, it would mean, I don't want to say that we as human beings do not have free will, that we cannot choose. Yes, we can choose. Even Primo Levi said that you can choose even in concentration camp. But of course, it has its cost. We have to pay very high a price for choosing this or that way. So
and everybody wants to believe that
absolutely,
it's
and
better
this
than.
Is good. I think it's good because actually it. This is why we call these people monsters. This is a self-defense mechanism. Yes. To call them monster, to say, not like us.
He's not like me.
Yeah, they're not human beings. What are they if they're not human beings? Okay, animals don't behave like that to each other. So this is a self-mechanism, it's a self-defense, and it's good. But on the other hand, the other side of that is that people do not want to look into that and think, what if I would come to such, yes. That is, think more about morale, about judgment, about these difficult decisions that you might, but these decisions are made on a daily basis. They're not only life or death decisions. For example, if you hear that, I don't know, Syrian people are refugees and that they are Muslims and or not, whatever, and you live, say, Stockholm, for example, where I live, and you know that the Syrian guy is having a dry cleaner shop, okay? And then because he's Syrian, you're not going to take your shirt to him to dry clean. So these kind of decisions, they start on a very small scale. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's it. This is how we are actually conditioned and tested on absolutely every step that we make.
It was a pure joy. Thank you for this meeting. One more thing. Your name is a Romanian name, right?
Romanian Drakulić.
Yeah, it's from Transylvania, okay. As far as I know.
I will tell you, this is not my name. This is my first ex-husband's name. His family, it's true, came more than 400 years ago, running in front of Turks, and they came to the part of Croatia that we call Krajina. So yes. My husband's family comes from there, but of course they came to Zagreb. However, they could count everybody all the way back to Romania. So this is where Drakulić come from. And when I'm in America, they say Dracula. I say yes. Think of me as a small Dracula, because Drakulić is diminutive, right? So I am a small Dracula, and I'm perfectly okay with that. I started to write with this name long ago. And then when I divorced, I didn't want to change the name because the name is like a brand
already.
And because I married 3 times, then I would have to change this brand every time or put one name, other name, third name. It was too much. It was too much of work, and I like the name Drakulić. I like it a lot.
So thank you very much. I took advantage of your of this interview because I really, really enjoy it.
Thank you very much. From Little Dracula.